Since I began chairman of the subcommittee, the committee has worked with GSA on reducing the costs of lease space by negotiating better deals and reducing the real estate footprint. We held a hearing and a series of roundtables with GSA, tenant agencies, and real estate experts on the large number of GSA leases expiring in the next 5 years and how we can take advantage of the current market to reduce costs to the taxpayer. We could save $500 million annually by just negotiating better lease deals. As a result of these efforts, we introduced and the House passed H.R. 4487, the Public Buildings Reform and Savings Act, which includes a leasing pilot program which will give GSA the tools that it needs to more effectively lock in the good lease deals. But while we have been working to improve how GSA manages its leases, there are more than 50 other agencies with their own authority to lease office and warehouse space. And half of those agencies don't even have to comply with OMB's directives to reduce space or report their leases to the government-wide federal real property database. For many of these agencies, there is little oversight of how they manage their leases. That is why the committee requested that the GAO do a review of these independent leasing authorities, including 1, how they are used and managed, 2, whether the agencies are getting good deals for the taxpayer, 3, whether agencies are reducing their cost and space footprint, and 4, whether agencies are acting within their legal authority. While the GAO found that some of these agencies were able to get comparable leasing rates or even better than GSA, in part due to their use of real estate brokers, very often they leased more space than they needed. In addition, there are serious questions about whether some of these agencies are exceeding their leasing authority, potentially running afoul of key laws such as the Anti-Deficiency Act. The committee's investigation of the Securities and Exchange Commission's use of its leasing authority in 2011 revealed the pitfalls that agencies can fall into. The SEC exceeded its leasing authority and wound up committing the taxpayers to a $500 million lease that it did not need, and ultimately had to be bailed out with help from the GSA. The SEC, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, and the VA are just a few agencies that have run afoul of laws limiting their leasing authorities. Intentional or not, agencies that do not have real property as their primary mission face serious legal risks. And it is critical, starting with this hearing, that this message is made clear to them. Before an agency signs a lease, there are 3 basic questions it should ask. 1, does the agency have leasing authority? 2, does the agency have either no-year funding or explicit authority to enter into multi-year leases? And 3, does the agency have an exemption from the Anti-Deficiency Act and the recording statute? While there are a few exceptions, if the answer to any of these questions is no, the agency may not have the legal authority to sign a lease or may have to obligate the full amount of the lease up front. This analysis is separate from the analysis for whether or not a lease is a capital lease for scoring purposes. We hope to hear more from GAO about its findings and learn how agencies with their own leasing authorities are managing and using their leasing authorities. We also ask the GAO to review the use of purchase options in GSA leases. If used strategically, purchase options could save significant taxpayer dollars. The budgetary scoring rules enacted in the 1990s effectively ended the practice of negotiating discounted purchase options in lease agreements by labeling them as capital leases. As capital leases, the full cost of the lease must be obligated up front, creating a disincentive to use them. The result has been the taxpayer paying for a building several times over through lease payments without ever being able to gain and equity interest. For example, we will have paid nearly $2 billion for headquarters space for DOT when a current lease expires without accruing any equity. By identifying and reviewing a number of purchase options in GSA leases, GAO found that in the options exercised in recent years, there was an $80 million benefit to the taxpayer. The Public Buildings Reform and Savings Act includes a provision that would provide GSA with the ability to again include these options, where appropriate, in its leases. I look forward to hearing more from GAO and from our other witnesses today on these issues. Thank you. I now call on Ranking Member of the Subcommittee, Mr. Carson, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Barletta and Ranking Member DeFazio. Welcome to today's hearing about the use of independent leasing authority. On behalf of Subcommittee Chairman Barletta and I, who requested 2 reports from GAO on the use of independent leasing authority by federal agencies and the use of purchase options in leasing. This hearing highlights some of the findings from both of these reports. I'm especially interested in the assessment of how GSA manages the civilian real estate inventory and its ability to advise other parts of the federal government on leasing commercial office space and warehouse space. In 1949, President Harry Truman signed a law that created the modern-day GSA and consolidated several federal agencies into one agency tasked with providing workplaces for federal employees and administering supplies. Since GSA was created, it has grown into a real estate giant that leases over 8,000 property assets, totaling 191 million rentable square feet with annual costs of $5.6 billion. However, in January 2003, GAO designated federal real property management as a high-risk area due in part to the federal government's over-reliance on costly leasing. The federal government's real estate portfolio was in need of oversight and corrective action. To that end, the Office of Management and Budget issued a memoranda in 2012, 2013, and 2015 requiring federal agencies to freeze and reduce their space footprint. This administration's sustained efforts, coupled with the efforts of this subcommittee, have resulted in millions of square footage of underutilized and unneeded property being shed from the federal real estate inventory. These efforts have saved money and have allowed precious resources to be better used to achieve agency missions. While there has been progress in really right-sizing the federal real estate inventory, last February, the leadership of this committee wrote to GAO asking them to study how agencies with their own leasing authority independent of GSA are exercising that authority. As detailed earlier by the chairman, many of these agencies were not subject to the freeze the footprint or even reduce the footprint directives from OMB. Though this group of agencies tended to get lease rates that were similar to GSA, many of them often acquired more space than GSA would typically allow. Additionally, GAO has indicated that some of the agencies that have independent leasing authority don't necessarily have the legal authority to sign a long-term operating lease. Many of the agencies that GAO have examined are doing a good job, but there is still room for improvement and the opportunity to find additional savings in future lease agreements. Today's testimony and dialogue should serve as guideposts to how agencies exercise their independent leasing authority going forward and how more effective use of purchase options can lower the cost of housing federal agencies further. I look forward to moving on with this discussion. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Carson. I now call on Ranking Member of the full committee, Mr. DeFazio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for putting scrutiny on this important issue, the cost and potential efficiencies that could be gained with enhanced leasing. The review of the independent leasing authority certainly has merit, and I don't mean just to gloss over that, but and I look forward to hearing more about that. But the other issue which has really disturbed me for so many years is that some idiot at OMB in 1990 promulgated a rule which we've been bound by, which is restricting the government's ability. We hear a lot about running government like a business. Well, what business is going to go out, enter into a costly lease, and deny itself the opportunity to purchase at the end of that lease at a discounted price, therefore being perpetually, forever locked into expensive leasing. Well, some brainiac down at OMB wrote this into a rule which somehow has never gotten changed at OMB. I'm not certain how we change OMB. I'm working with Chairman Chaffetz on OMB reform because I keep running into them doing all sorts of things that do not make sense for the U.S. Government or the taxpayers of the United States of America. But in this case, I'm pleased to see that our committee has a solution in H.R. 4487. I mean, for the first time ever in 2000, I think it was 2008, federal government began occupying more leased than owned space. And in almost every case, that is the more expensive way to go. And it also deprives the federal building fund of direct payments that would help for future acquisitions of space and for maintenance and repair of federal assets. So the bill 4487 doesn't really address the idiots at OMB. It doesn't end run around their rule, but that is at least an improvement. So I fully support 4487, and I'm looking forward to hearing more, and I'd love anybody on the panel to justify what we're doing now by denying ourselves the authority to purchase at a discounted rate. If anybody wants to volunteer that, I'd be happy to discuss it with them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Fazio. On our panel today, we have Mr. David Wise, Director of Physical Infrastructure Team Government Accountability Office, Mr. Chris Weisner, Assistant Commissioner for Leasing, Public Buildings Service, General Services Administration, the Honorable W. Thomas Reeder, Jr., Director, Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation, and Mr. John K. LaPiana, Deputy Undersecretary for Finance and Administration, the Smithsonian Institution. I ask unanimous consent that our witnesses' full statements be included in the record without objection, so ordered. Each of you is now recognized for 5 minutes. Mr. Wise, you may proceed.
Chairman Barletta, Ranking Member Carson, and members of the subcommittee, I'm pleased to be here today to discuss our work on federal use of independent leasing authority for real property. While GSA leases real property on behalf of many federal tenants, Congress can provide independent leasing authority to federal entities either through their enabling legislation or through an Appropriations Act. GSA tracks and reports on its tenants' real property holdings. However, less is known about the holdings of federal entities that independently lease real property. In 2004, the President issued an executive order establishing the Federal Real Property Council, FRPC, composed of CFO Act federal entities. OMB chairs the FRPC. Goals of the FRPC include developing guidance, facilitating agency asset management plans, and serving as a clearinghouse for leading practices. The order also directed establishment of a government-wide real property database now called the Federal Real Property Profile, FRPP. Today, I'd like to make 4 main points. 1, in surveying 103 federal entities, we found that of the 52 reporting leasing authority, 25 are not required to report to FRPP, and there's a lack of coordination and information sharing with the FRPC. 2, most of the 37 selected independent leases we reviewed were comparable to or lower than matched GSA rates. 3, most selected entities' leasing policies generally aligned with leading practices but lack documentation. And 4, most selected entities exceeded GSA's recommended target for space allocation. While not required, neither GSA nor OMB maintains a comprehensive list of federal government entities with independent leasing authority. FRPP offers a possible way to determining this, but the information is incomplete, as only agencies in the FRPC are required to annually submit their real property information to FRPP. Based on our survey, the 25 entities that are not members of FRPC reported in FY15 that they lease space covering approximately 8.3 million rentable square feet and costing about $293 million in annual rent. FRPC members coordinate efforts and share leading practices in areas such as space allocation that OMB staff have said are critical to reform efforts. However, the 25 non-member entities are excluded from FRPC efforts. We also found that FRPC members were more likely to have leasing policies that aligned with leading practices than non-members. Increasing FRPC participation would likely allow all federal entities to benefit from the collaboration and sharing of leading practices. Our related report that we issued today recommended that OMB establish efficient methods for including data from non-FRPC member entities to the FRPP and increase collaboration between FRPC member and non-member entities. OMB agreed with both recommendations. We analyzed 37 selected independent leases across 7 federal entities. Of these, 14 had rates that were less costly than matched GSA leases, and 11 had comparable rates. The remaining 12 leases had rates that cost more than matched GSA leases. We identified several possible factors why some of the independent leases we analyzed were less expensive than matched GSA leases, as follows. GSA uses standardized lease documents that include clauses that can be more rigorous than the leases provided by private sector landlords. Renovation or reconfiguration costs were more common in GSA leases than the independent leases in our sample. The independent leases we analyzed had periods of free rent built into the leases more frequently than the matched GSA lease. We developed a list of leading practices that federal entities should incorporate into their real property leasing functions. These include 1, assessing need, 2, planning ahead, 3, ensuring best value, and 4, analyzing and documenting lease budget effect. We reviewed the extent to which 8 selected federal entities had policies that aligned with leading government leasing practices. Although most of the selected entities had established policies consistent with leading government practices, we found numerous instances where the lease files lacked evidence to support that the leading practices were actually used. Specifically, we found that a high percentage of the entity's lease files lacked evidence for analyzing and documenting the budget effects of the lease. This is important because federal entities must comply with the recording statute, which requires federal agencies to record the full amount of their contractual liabilities, including leases, against funds available when the contract is executed. Violations of the recording statute can also result in Anti-Deficiency Act violations if lease obligations exceed available budget authority at the time the lease is executed. All the 8 selected entities we reviewed leased more office space per employee than GSA's recommended target of 150 square feet per employee. 28 of the 30 selected office leases we analyzed exceeded the GSA recommended target on average by a factor of 2. Many of these leases had vacant office spaces, which can inflate the per-person space allocation. Greater involvement in FRPC could help these agencies learn and implement leading practices in space utilization. This completes my prepared statement. I'd be pleased to respond to any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Wise. Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Weisner, you may proceed.
Good morning, Chairman Barletta, Ranking Member Carson, and members of the committee. I'm Chris Weisner, the Assistant Commissioner for Leasing at the General Services Administration's Public Building Service. I appreciate being invited here today to discuss GSA's efforts to provide cost-effective lease space for our partner federal agencies. GSA's mission is to provide the best value in real estate to government and to the American taxpayer. We currently have an inventory of 376 million square feet of space. Approximately half of that is leased, accounting for more than 8,300 leases across the country. We seek to provide space for our partner federal agencies and assist them in achieving their missions while best serving the public interest. As a part of the administration's management agenda, GSA prioritizes finding ways to maximize utilization of the existing federally owned inventory, including reducing the number of leases we hold in our portfolio. By dramatically improving utilization of our current inventory, we have saved millions of dollars for our partner federal agencies and the general public. GSA works closely with OMB to help implement the national strategy for the efficient use of real property, and the 2 agencies have been key coordinators of Freeze the Footprint and the current Reduce the Footprint initiatives. GSA is implementing Reduce the Footprint by helping other federal agencies increase their office space utilization and minimize cost, including thoroughly implementing innovative workplace strategies. One example of GSA's efforts is the Department of Homeland Security consolidation at St. Elizabeth's, due to be completed in 2021. The first phase of the project, completed in 2013, consolidated the United States Coast Guard headquarters at the St. Elizabeth campus. As a result, GSA was able to vacate several leases totaling nearly 1 million square feet. With all 3 phases of the consolidation are completed, approximately 40 leases will be consolidated on the federally owned campus, resulting in over $1 billion in savings. GSA Leasing Support Services Contract, or GLS, continues to be a workforce multiplier and is a critical part of GSA's strategy in delivering space. This past September, GSA awarded 9 GLS contracts across the country, including 2 to 2 small businesses. We anticipate GLS to be used for approximately 30 to 40 million square feet of our inventory, equating to approximately $100 million in rent cost avoidance to our partner federal agencies. GSA's goal for the leasing program is to make it easier for the real estate industry to do business with the federal government, for GSA to deliver space quicker to our federal customer agencies, and for GSA to secure competitive lease rates. GSA uses a comprehensive, deliberative process that ensures full competition and fair rental rates for the taxpayer, while taking into account such public interest as proximity to central business districts and public transportation and supporting the mission requirements of GSA partners. In an effort to improve the delivery of lease space, in 2015, GSA rolled out its online offer portal, known as the Automated Advanced Acquisition Program, or AAAP, in all U.S. markets. The goal for the platform is to make it easier for the real estate industry to do business with the federal government, for GSA to deliver space quicker to its federal customer agencies, and for GSA to receive competitive rates. AAAP's paperless online offer submission process enables the government to establish this goal. Since its inception in the GSA National Capital Region in 2005, the AAAP has conducted over 200 lease transactions, totaling over 4 million square feet and over $1.7 billion in total contract value. Chairman Barletta, Ranking Member Carson, and members of the committee, we strive to meet our customers' requirements in an efficient and transparent manner and are committed to reducing cost. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Reader, you may proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Carson, Ranking Member DeFazio, and members of the subcommittee. I'm very pleased to appear before you today to discuss the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation and its engagement of the General Services Administration to secure a new headquarters lease for PBGC that reduces our space and consolidates our headquarters operations into a single location. PBGC was established over 40 years ago by the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, or ERISA, to protect the retirement incomes of workers and retirees covered by private sector defined benefit pension plans. PBGC receives no taxpayer dollars. PBGC's operations are financed by insurance premiums, investment income, and assets and recoveries from failed plans. PBGC covers more than 40 million Americans in more than 23,000 pension plans. We work with financially troubled employers that sponsor pension plans to help them preserve promised benefits and avoid plan failure. For workers and retirees in plans that do fail, the agency's guarantee is critical to their retirement security. Today, PBGC is responsible for the payment of current and future pensions for about 1.5 million Americans in 4,800 failed pension plans. PBGC's staff come from diverse fields, including law, actuarial science, financial analysis, auditing, and information technology. The great service provided by our highly collaborative, talented, and devoted workforce is well recognized by our customers. In 2015, our customer satisfaction score surpassed the scores of all government agencies, as well as the best companies in the private sector. PBGC began leasing its current headquarters space at 1200 K Street in 1992. As the demand for PBGC's services has grown, its federal and contractor workforce has also expanded and is now over 1,800 total federal employees and contractors, and our headquarters has expanded to 2 additional nearby buildings here in Washington. PBGC also leases space in Kingstown, Virginia, to take advantage of lower rates for certain back office operations while maintaining proximity for headquarters staff. And we have a decreasing number of field offices. In 1994, we had 17 field offices. Today, we have only 5, as we continue to find opportunities to improve efficiency and further reduce our footprint. Although ERISA technically gives us independent leasing authority, it was an obvious decision for us to go to the agency with the expertise, bench strength, and clear authority to obtain the best value for PBGC's premium payers and other stakeholders as we contemplated the expiration of our headquarters lease at the end of 2018. Last year, we submitted our program of requirements to the GSA, and in March of this year, PBGC met with GSA, and the broker assigned to PBGC's lease procurement to go over proposed timelines and additional information. Last month, the GSA submitted the prospectus lease for PBGC's consolidated headquarters space to the committee, and we have begun discussing the prospectus with subcommittee staff. Although it's still early in the process, I believe we have established a sound working relationship with GSA. The PBGC and GSA teams have been working well together and communications are good. We are moving forward in accordance with the steps GSA and PBGC have agreed to, and we're making good progress. PBGC is pleased to be partnering with GSA in seeking consolidated headquarters location. Consolidating our headquarters into one building will not only reduce our footprint and our cost, but it will also improve effective communication and collaboration in serving our customers. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today and look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Lapiano, you can proceed.
Thank you. On behalf of the Smithsonian Institution, thank you, Chairman Barletta, Ranking Member Carson, and members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to testify before the subcommittee today. The Smithsonian is the world's largest museum, education, and research complex, consisting of 19 museums and galleries, the National Zoo, and 9 research facilities. Millions visit us each year, but very few see the hard work happening away from the museums that makes it all possible. And much of that behind-the-scenes work is being accomplished in leased space. The Smithsonian's leasing requirements are unique. Our combined need for collection storage, administrative offices, research, laboratory, and exhibition space is unlike that of any other federal agency. We currently lease about 1.5 million square feet at an annual cost of approximately $52 million. This is a significant cost to the Smithsonian and in turn to the American public. As a result, we take seriously our responsibility to spend these dollars wisely and transparently. We get our wisdom through in-house professional real estate staff and outside private sector experts who identify the most cost-effective leasing opportunities through detailed studies of real estate markets and submarkets. We recognize that by relying on both internal and external expertise, the Smithsonian can best meet its unique space requirements, ensure competitive negotiations with lessors, and identify when consolidation makes the most economic or programmatic sense. We believe that this reliance has resulted in leases at or below market rates. We also believe that the Smithsonian is obligated to demonstrate that its use of taxpayer dollars is responsible. As an entity with independent leasing authority, we are not required to file annual reports with the Federal Real Property Council, but we do so voluntarily as part of our commitment to follow best practices. Our Board of Regents, too, recognizes the importance of following best practices and must vet and approve all leases by the Smithsonian with a net present value of $5 million or more. 6 members of Congress sit on the board, and 3 of those congressional regions are also members of the board's Facilities Committee, which has primary oversight over the Smithsonian's leasing activities, among other duties. In determining our leasing requirements, Smithsonian museums, research centers, and support offices are required to formally compile a detailed request of their needs. Once approved, our real estate office works with the unit to verify and refine the requirement and develop an appropriate space plan. We will only look to leasing space if current Smithsonian assets are unavailable, insufficient, or inappropriate for the proposed use. As the Smithsonian's Inspector General noted in a 2014 audit report on leasing activities, quote, by monitoring the Smithsonian's use of leased office spaces, the real estate office successfully consolidated some spaces to reduce costs where possible, unquote. A disciplined leasing process is particularly important in securing space to house the national collections. Since Congress established the Smithsonian in 1846, we have learned much about the proper care and preservation of diverse collections and have applied that learning to develop realistic space requirements. And these requirements can vary dramatically among the 138 million items in our collections, from mosquitoes to daguerreotypes to the space shuttle. But all must satisfy Smithsonian standards for temperature, relative humidity, ventilation, lighting, fire suppression, and security. Our stringent policies and our adherence to them reflect how seriously we take our obligations to preserve and protect the national collections. Looking ahead, last year we issued a collection space framework plan to guide our current and future collection needs while providing renovation and construction strategies that, in the end, will eliminate our need for leased collection space. Pursuant to the framework, we are planning to construct an additional storage pod at the Museum Support Center in Suitland, Maryland, and 2 new storage modules at the Udvar-Hazy Center in Chantilly, Virginia. The first of those modules will initially serve as a temporary collection swing space during the revitalization of the National Air and Space Museum. A bill authorizing those projects has been referred to this subcommittee. Our requirements for office space are less complex, but still carefully developed to ensure operational needs are met in a cost-effective manner. In addition to controlling leasing costs through competition, the Smithsonian is now pursuing a long-term cost-saving strategy. Our current leased office holdings in DC are scattered across the metro area, creating operational inefficiencies and growing leasing costs. To address this, we have aligned the termination dates of these leases with an eye toward consolidating space and creating savings. Proposals are now being evaluated in response to a non-binding solicitation to consolidate Smithsonian administrative office space in the DC metro area. We are conducting a cost-benefit analysis of all realistic options, from maintaining the status quo and extending those leases to outright purchase of a building. And we have also consulted with the GSA to identify suitable properties that may be available for consolidation within the federal real estate portfolio. As we look forward to the opening of the new National Museum of African American History and Culture this September, and the renovation of the Air and Space Museum, and as our collections continue to grow, our need for space is greater than our budget will allow. For that reason, the Smithsonian will continue to seek efficiencies and consolidate our leased spaces in the most responsible and transparent manner possible. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and thank you for your support of the Smithsonian Institution.
Thank you for your testimony. I will now begin the first round of questions, limited to 5 minutes for each member. If there are any additional questions following the first round, we'll have additional rounds of questions as needed. Mr. Wise, the one report issued by GAO today is a review of the independent leasing authorities of agencies outside of GSA. A number of agencies like the SEC and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, or CFTC, have exceeded their legal leasing authorities and run afoul of the law. We want to alert the other agencies before they make similar mistakes. If we could have the chart put up. Generally, in order to determine if an agency has the obligational authority to sign a lease, GAO asks 3 questions. First, does the agency have leasing authority? Second, does the agency have either explicit multi-year leasing authority or no-year funds? And third, does the agency have explicit exemptions from the Anti-Deficiency Act and the recording statute? Barring some exceptions, the answer to all these questions must be yes for an agency to sign a long-term lease, and not to obligate the full cost of the lease up front. Is this correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Mr. Wise, and to be clear, the evaluation of whether an agency has the obligational authority to sign a lease under the ADA is a separate evaluation from the scoring issue of whether a lease is a capital or an operating lease. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that's also correct.
Mr. Wise, recently GAO reviewed the CFTC's use of its leasing authority. Can you elaborate on what GAO found?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. And in case of CFTC, it was a little bit of kind of putting the cart ahead of the horse ahead of the cart ahead of the horse. What happened with CFTC was they anticipated getting a great increase in their funding, and then at the same time anticipating they'd be hiring a lot more staff. It didn't happen. Meantime, they leased the space, and as a result, they ended up with a lot of very underutilized space and some significant obligational authority, some significant obligations that could incur up to about $75 million. As a matter of fact, I had an opportunity to visit the office in Kansas City that was one of the offices that was part of our review, and it was rather modest office space, but it included 2 floors, one of which had been emptied out. Now, CFTC was trying to work with the landlord to see if it could sublease that space, but the landlord, of course, has probably relatively minimal interest in doing that since he's already being paid by CFTC, and these leases don't expire until 2025. So there's significant issue there with the Recording Act. Now, whether or not it's an anti-deficiency violation, that is something that's still being determined. Our report was issued back in May, a couple of months ago, and CFTC is still trying to work through those issues. But it was definitely an issue with the Recording Act, and they got way ahead of themselves when it came to getting into obligations that were beyond what the authority that they had.
There you go. Mr. Reader, the PBGC is now working through GSA to lease new headquarters space. Why did your agency decide to use GSA?
As you can probably tell from my oral testimony, I'm very proud of what the PBGC does. We are very busy and very adept at preserving pensions and protecting pensioners and paying timely benefits and maintaining high standards of stewardship. And regarding stewardship and accountability, we believe that the GSA is more adept at obtaining the best value for our headquarters lease. And also although we clearly meet the first 2 criteria that you mentioned, that we have express statutory leasing authority and we have know-your funds. The recording statute is, the interpretation of the recording statute is unclear enough to us that we wanted to go with a GSA to have a clearer authority for our headquarters lease.
Thank you, Mr. Lapiano. I understand the Smithsonian is currently reviewing its leasing authority. As chairman of the subcommittee, it seems the answer should be a simple one: work with GSA to meet your leasing needs. When do you expect to have a decision on how the Smithsonian plans to proceed with its leases?
Thank you. We are currently, let me back up and just say that as we've entered into leases, we've done so in good faith, and we think we have very good grounds for doing so. The issue was raised in the last few months about whether we had the budget authority to do so or not, that there was some lack of clarity, and we're working with OMB right now in addressing those issues, and we'll keep the committee apprised of our success there and results there. We're hopeful that it'll be is sooner rather than later.
Thank you. Now recognize Ranking Member Mr. Carson.
Thank you, Chairman Barletta. Mr. Wise, is it fair to say that agencies that are responsible for procuring their own space tend to acquire more space per employee than when GSA procures space for other agencies? What do you think is the case?
Yes, in our review, Ranking Member Carson, we found that in most cases, almost all actually, the independent leasing independent leasing entities ended up acquiring almost twice as much as the recommended 150 square feet per employee that GSA now recommends.
In your mind, sir, should GSA be making greater use of purchase options to reduce the cost of housing federal employees?
Well, it's certainly a possibility. The way we view it, I think, is that purchase options could be one more tool in the GSA toolkit that would potentially enable the government to save money in acquiring space for its employees. And we've seen in our review, we found a few cases where that indeed had taken place, and there are a couple of more in the pipeline that could potentially save money. I think, as the chairman mentioned in his opening remarks, there was some significant savings for several properties over the past number of years. And so, yes, I think it could be an option. It could be useful for the government and could lead to some potential savings, assuming one analyzes the totality of the situation.
Thank you. Mr. Wisner, how long on average does GSA occupy a building where GSA is the sole lease tenant?
Where we're the sole lease tenant, on average, we are in the building between 26 and 27 years.
Okay. How do other governments, either local or foreign, handle long-term leasing?
My own personal information on these is Canada and Japan and London and England often own their federal facilities.
Okay. And thank you, sir. And lastly, Mr. Reeder, can you elaborate on how PBGC came to the conclusion as to why it was in their interest to have GSA take over the lease consolidation efforts?
As I mentioned earlier, we do think that they have the bench strength and the clear authority to negotiate a lease. Since we saw our lease ending in 2018, beginning in 2014, we began looking at all the options we had, various leasing options, and including a purchase option. And before making the decision to go to the GSA, we hired a space planner and architectural firm and began developing our program of requirements. We made the decision to go with GSA fairly recently, so we did it in consultation in our own building, as well as with OMB and as well as with GSA, and I think it's the right decision.
Lastly, really this time, Mr. Lampiana, would the Smithsonian lose anything by going through GSA to meet their leasing needs for office and warehouse space? And does the Smithsonian have the institutional knowledge to be an effective player in the commercial office real estate market?
If I can answer your second question first, we believe we do. And as Director Reeder noted in the rationale for why PBGC looks to GSA, at the Smithsonian, we do have the expertise. We do have the bench strength. We have diverse and unique, not just leases, but properties that we manage. And that for us, the most efficient and effective and responsive way to enter into leases or at least seek leases is internally with outside experts. We also rely on GSA as an important resource. As I mentioned in my testimony, we voluntarily report to the council because we know it's the best practice. And we're always open to discussing with GSA other opportunities that would make our leasing more efficient and cost-effective.
Yes, sir. Thank you, gentlemen. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chair Ranking recognizes Mr. DeFazio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wisner, let's just look at purchase options for a moment. If purchase options are included, does that invariably drive up the monthly rental costs? I mean, does the owner exact a premium at the beginning? And would it make it more difficult for you to negotiate if you were including the purchase option?
Sir, each deal would need to be evaluated specifically, but it's my experience that when you are negotiating in the initial prior to award, purchase options can be built into leases. They are a point of negotiation. We, in the past, have traded purchase options for free rent. We've traded purchase options for other things. So kind of all things being equal, it's what's important to the individual that you're negotiating against, what their financial requirements are, and what their institutions behind the lease want. So if they're a long-term hold organization, they may not be as interested in a purchase option. If they're looking at a potential get GSA or get the federal government as a tenant and then sell the building, a purchase option may be of no consequence to them. So every deal is specific, but my experience is that you can put purchase options on the table, yes.
So it could be a useful tool.
Yes, sir.
And right now, this committee has recognized, because of the way, I mean, this is a little bit nonsensical. So let me just give a really simple, I know not realistic example. We have an operating lease for 30 years. We're going to pay $1 million a year, okay, $30 million outlay. We have a lease purchase, and let's just say it worked the same way. You're going to pay $1 million a month, but at the end of 30 years, you get to purchase at a discount from the value of the property, and you'll be able to continue tenancy, et cetera. But the one with annual rent counts in this year's budget as $1 million, and the other one counts as $30 million plus the purchase price. Is that correct?
Sir, scoring is not in my purview. However, I can tell you that there must be an evaluation of the entire deal. So when we look at the deal, it's the value of the rent and whatever the purchase option is at the end, and it could score as a capital lease for us.
Right. And so what would be ideal would be we would look at all the same way. We would look at the obligation over time. So if we're going to rent it for $1 million a year, we're going to say, well, it's going to cost $30 million to the taxpayers. And if we're going to rent it, you know, for less and have a lease purchase, and you say, well, gee, that's going to cost $50, except we get an asset. I mean, there's got to be a better way to do this. I mean, we pretty much, I think the rule was written, and maybe someone there can address that. I think the rule was written because at the time, the government used to actually more regularly acquire property and build structures when we knew we were going to have long-term needs, because that's the most cost-effective way to go. But then the lease purchase came along, which was less cost-effective, obviously. But what happened in writing a rule to try and level the playing field, we actually put the lease purchase off the table, and we don't, and Congress, in its infinite wisdom, not having created capital budgets, doesn't hardly ever allow the purchase of property and the building of a structure. We'd rather be idiots and pay a premium and end up with nothing. Can anybody address that? No? Okay. Mr. Wise?
Well, I wouldn't, I don't know if I'd characterize Congress quite that way, but in any case,
No, you don't call us idiots. I can call us idiots.
What happened is pretty much like what you said. It was an attempt to level the playing field, but then it took away the incentives for the lease purchases, the discount lease purchases, because as leveling the playing field, it sort of eliminated those possibilities. And as a result, there was we live in the land of unintended consequences, and one of them was then the movement towards operating leases, which only had to be accounted for, as you put it, 1 year at a time, versus counting the totality, which put a pretty big hole in anybody's budget. Okay, so then you end up with a situation, and you've lost that tool, and as a result, you do end up in situations where you're paying rent essentially ad infinitum. I mean, we found cases where I think one of our reports, we found there was an EPA building, EPA was renting a facility in Seattle. They've been renting for 60 years, so, but our work on...
EPA hasn't existed quite that long. Jimmy Carter, wasn't it? EPA, it wasn't 60 years.
Maybe, but anyways, renting a long time in Seattle.
Yeah.
But in any event, what we found in doing the work that we did for the committee this time was that we examined over 18,000 leases and found almost this since the early 90s, since the scoring rules came into effect, and kind of buttressing your point, we only found 17 cases where lease purchases were involved. And so it had effectively taken away the incentive both for discount and for even lease purchases themselves. So it did effectively end those options, and we are left with what we have today, which is a great over-reliance on leasing, and as you framed it, much higher costs in the long run to the government, which is something we've talked about in a lot of our reports for this committee and for others.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Mr. Cabello.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I thank all the witnesses for their testimony today. Mr. Weiss, while the GAO report does not include an exhaustive list of agencies with leasing authorities, is there a particular reason why the VA is not included in the report, and I'll explain to you why I'm asking this question. I represent the southernmost district in Florida, and we have many veterans who live down in the Florida Keys, and oftentimes these people have to drive long distances in order to get the quality care they deserve. Sometimes they don't even get that, but that's a separate issue. So I wanted to pose a question and see if there's anything we can do by working together to remedy this situation.
Yes, thank you for your question. Actually, I think the short answer to that is VA now goes through GSA for its leasing.
Okay, so you don't foresee any role or any opportunity for us to work on this? It would have to be exclusively through GSA.
I can take part of that answer from the GSA side. So the Veterans Administration has come to GSA for delegation of authority. We're using our authority to assist them in the acquisition of lease space for these requirements. I'm not familiar with the one in Florida, but we have approved a significant number of leases and lease actions with the Veterans Administration. They've done a lot of work to centralize their real estate program, and we've seen a significant amount of improvement over the couple years that I've been involved with it.
Okay, well, I thank you, and I look forward to working with you
Yes.
to remedy this situation, because, again, sometimes we have veterans driving 3 and 4 hours in order to get care, and if we can do anything to expand access to care, it would make a great difference to the people in my district, and I'm sure this is something that happens throughout the country. So thank you both very much. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now begin a second round of questions. Mr. Reeder and Mr. LaPiana, what steps have your agencies taken in the past to ensure you achieve the best lease rates for the taxpayers? Mr. Wisner, you want to, Mr. Reeder, rather, start first?
Yes, we began leasing our current headquarters back in 1992. So it's our field offices and our Kingstown space were leased in a comparable time frame. So as I implied earlier, we are not that we don't do a lot in the leasing arena, so, and not often. It's been 24 years since we've leased our main space, and we follow procurement standards. We follow the regular procurement requirements, and we believe we've gotten competitive or below market rates on most of our leases, as has been shown by the GAO report. But we believe that our turn towards the GSA will help us do that even better.
Mr. LaPiana?
Thank you. Before we even consider whether we should be seeking a lease, we do an internal needs analysis to make sure that within our portfolio we cannot accommodate the needs of the particular unit or museum. After the needs analysis, both our internal staff of real estate experts and outside consultants and brokers advise us on framing an RFP. All our leases are subject to a competition, and it's a rigorous competition. We take it very seriously, and the Smithsonian is a very good tenant, and we get very good responses to our RFPs. Once we get down to the best and final offers, we negotiate hard with our potential lessors. As I mentioned, we're a very good tenant, and the competition and the responses that we get reflect that. And our staff of experts look to use every available tool, tenant improvement allowances, free rent, negotiation of escalation costs is all part of the final negotiation. And we believe that in the end, the proof is in that our leases are at or below market rates.
Mr. Wisner, how does GSA ensure that its tenant agencies do not lease more space than they need?
Excuse me, sir. So we work with tenant agencies on their program requirements. We have our, many of the tenant agencies have submitted their reduce the footprint or freeze the footprint plans to OMB. They oftentimes have already set their space requirements, which is a really good way to enter into the program. Sometimes we work with a customer agency who have not established their utilization rates or are in the process of establishing their utilization rates, and that's where we use the recommended square footage utilization that GSA has in place. And so we work with our customer agencies. We have units around the country that are workplace strategists. Their job is to help more efficiently plan the space, look for the most efficient ways to plan space, look for shared space, look for all opportunities before we go to the market and run a competition. So the goal is to get the program requirements locked in at a utilization rate that is significantly improved over where they are currently, and get to the 150 square foot GSA standard that we're looking at, but we have many agencies that are below the 150 square foot standard right now.
Mr. Lapiano, in your testimony, you talk about the importance of minimizing lease costs. How much office space do you currently lease, and how many people do you house in that space? And do you currently meet or exceed GSA's standard for space utilization?
We have in the Metro DC area the vast majority of our office space, and it's about 360,000 square feet. In general, it depends on the building, and I say that with respect to what we own and what we lease and what activities are going on in the building, so that it's difficult for us to use the GSA office number across the board, because not all of our activities, and actually a majority of the space that we need, is devoted to non-office or administrative functions. However, in the end, staff-wise, FTE-wise, we're in the ballpark with respect to the GSA number. However, in preparing for this hearing, we were looking at that and anticipating a question like this. And we also need to factor in, and we don't have the numbers with us yet, and we'd be happy to share it with the committee once we've collected the information. We have 6,300 employees. We also have 6,500 volunteers and interns who are also using those spaces, so that when we make the calculations with regard to the GSA number, we're looking only at staff. But those interns and those volunteers who we couldn't run the Smithsonian without are not in that calculation. So we're pretty confident, we're actually very confident that even under a very conservative calculation, that we meet or are under the GSA number.
Thank you. Recognize Ranking Member Carson.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Wise, how can federal real property leading practices be better developed and shared across the entire community of federal leasees?
Mr. Carson, we had recommended in our report that the FRPC, the Federal Real Property Council, is a good vehicle for doing this, because they meet monthly, they discuss exactly the kinds of issues that are of interest to all real property managers. It acts like a clearinghouse, a forum for discussing the issues of the day for all federal real property, senior federal real property managers. That said, we understand that, putting a lot of small entities into the Federal Real Property Council could make it a little bit more unwieldy, but there's another potential vehicle for that we identified and have discussed during the course of our work, and that's a Small Business Council, which acts as sort of a subsidiary group to that. And so we feel that the framework is actually in place to do that, and that's why we recommended that this would be, we think, an excellent idea in order to kind of bring everybody into the tent, so to speak, and would help in terms of being able to implement best leading practices and more efficiencies for enabling agencies to do a better job.
Thank you. Mr. Lapiana, the GAO found that many agencies with independent leasing authority often lease twice as much office space that GSA usually allows for office space. How does the Smithsonian allotment of office space per employee compare with the GSA standard of 150 square feet of office space per person?
I think we reflect well against the GSA standard. As I mentioned, a smaller portion of our staff is administrative and in traditional offices. We have a lot of curators with collections who are in with the collections. We have, in our number, we have exhibit design and fabrication. We have some museum space. We have research laboratories. And we also have volunteers who actually turn out to be about half of our workforce. Taking that all into account, we are very confident that we are at or better than the GSA number. However, it does come with these caveats of it's not just office space in the calculation. It's laboratories, it's libraries, it's exhibitions, it's exhibit fabrication and research.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Wisner, as you know, the committee has been pushing GSA hard to increase your average lease terms to 10 years or more, and to increase your use of brokers to get better deals and to work through your expiring leases while the market is still favorable for the government. Can you update us on those two efforts?
Yes, sir. Internally, we have established a policy for longer-term leases. The goal here is 10-year leases or longer. Exceptions to a 10-year deal must be escalated through our management program. So I have policies in place and I have approvals in place. We are executing longer-term leases in markets where it does make sense, and that revolves around escalating markets where there's opportunity for us to lock in now. The second part of your question, excuse me, do you mind repeating it? The broker? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So we established a new broker contract in September of this last year. We have 9 new brokers across the country. We split the country into zones so we could give an opportunity for small businesses to compete on that contract. The required tasking and measure within GSA is 50% of all of our leases that are commissionable events will be tasked to the broker contract. We've met our minimum obligation under the contract this year. We will continue to do that tasking. This contract runs for 5 years, and it's my expectation we will continue to task at that rate. So the goal is 50% of all of our leases that are commissionable events will go to the brokers.
Mr. Wise, GAO is issuing 2 reports today. One of them is purchase options and lease agreements. I was able to visit one of the buildings you highlighted in that report, the IRS building in Detroit. We were able to purchase that building for $1. Can you talk briefly about your findings and the potential financial benefits of the purchase option?
Mr. Chairman, yes. There are really 3 key points to the report that we issued today that you referred to. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, one key point is the scoring rules that have virtually kind of did away with the lease purchase options and especially the discount purchase options. As I mentioned earlier, of the over 18,000 leases we looked at, we only found a handful, 17 or so, that try to exercise that option. And I would say that, you know, something else that we've been talking about during the course of this hearing, it can be advantageous to the government to be able to eventually acquire a building. I think Mr. DeFazio was alluding to that in his remarks. And Detroit, that IRS building in Detroit was a good example. While the government did pay rent for 20 years, at the end of the day, they owned the building. So you have a long-term solution to housing the IRS office in Detroit. And so that in that case, it's, I think, kind of one in the win column for the government. As we talked about a little bit earlier, if that can be given as an option for the government going forward, then there is a potential for additional savings. We saw in the course of our work, there are 2 other buildings that also save substantial money. One was Columbia Plaza, which is about a block or so from the State Department, which the government managed to come up with a savings of about $50 million from that exercise in the lease purchase. And another one was another USDA facility in Riverdale, in Maryland, nearby in Maryland here, which also saved about $14 million. Then there are 2 other buildings during the course of our review we found that looked like they could have potential to save money going forward exercising an option. One is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission building, which is located not far from Union Station, and that will have a lease purchase option that will be open in 2025, which the building's been appraised at $133 million, and the option is for $20 million, so there's a potential savings there. again, as I mentioned earlier, these things have to be looked at in totality once you get to that point, you know, looking at security issues, looking at seismic issues and other kinds of regulations that go into the federal building aspects. And the last one, or the second one that may have a potential savings is a National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration facility out in College Park, Maryland, which also has a 2025 option, has been assessed for $86 million with a $27 million option, so there's a potential there. So once we get to that point, we'll see. But these are potential savings, not actual realized savings yet. But as I mentioned in my earlier remarks, this is another potential tool in the toolkit to try to help the government rationalize its real property portfolio and end up with a situation where you're not just paying leases in perpetuity.
Thank you. I have no further questions. Ranking Member Carson?
No, sir.
If there, oh, I didn't see Ms. Norton. Ms. Norton, the chair recognizes Ms. Norton.
Thank you very much, Chairman Barletta. Indeed, I thank you for holding this hearing because I've had a long-term issue with independent leases apart from the expert agency that Congress said should do the leasing, and we've had some terrible mishaps when that was done, and people asked, essentially, agencies essentially acted like the world was theirs. So let's see if we can find the best opportunity for us, not an opportunity necessarily, not necessarily the best opportunity for the government. But in light of the fact that I have long been critical of independent agency, of agency independently doing their own leasing, Mr. Weiss, I was interested that you looked at 37 independent leases. It says selected independent leases, so I assume that they were randomly selected, and found comparable to or lower than the GSA rates. How do you account for that?
Mrs. Norton, thanks for the question. There could be any number of reasons for that. There are cases where they're looking at various properties that there may be less need of, they're willing to take property that with fewer tenant improvements than, say, a government property, or there could be a possibility that they'll take it as is, which means that they're willing to shoulder some of the burden themselves or not get involved in big expanded kind of improvements. And so that's certainly one reason why, you know, there could be somewhat lower rates, and depending on location can also make a difference. So there could be...
Some of these may have been opportunities that perhaps anybody could have seen, and the agency saw, took advantage of them, and the kind of expertise that that GSA is purported to have might not have been necessary to see these opportunities.
Well, yes, but another possibility also that we learned in talking to GSA and others was that there are somewhat more stringent requirements in GSA-related leases that have to do with security, that have to do with things like seismic requirements that may not be relevant for the independent leasing authorities, or may not necessarily get engaged in those kinds of things. And from what we understood...
I would have thought security and all of that sort of thing was relevant for every leasing authority, particularly anywhere near the nation's capital, the national capital region.
Well, it can be, but they're at least according to the GSA officials, that the GSA standards can be somewhat higher for some of these things, depending on the type of building and the location, as well as the other sort of the environmental aspects of the building, like seismic and energy saving requirements and this sort of thing. So those were sort of the main reasons that we found in the course of our work, ma'am.
This question would be, I suppose, both for Mr. Wisner and Mr. Wise. I recall that there is, in fact, this is an ongoing event. There is going to be building taking place at the old soldiers' home here in the District of Columbia. I believe that the DOD wants that to take place as a way to support the soldiers' home and the soldiers who are there. And it's interesting that they reached out to GSA and essentially virtually gave GSA the authority. Now, this is DOD. Now, DOD does a great deal of construction of its own, but I believe recognizing that this construction was occurring in an urban neighborhood, they might have felt that GSA was the best actor in this case. So my question is, does GSA offer? Do agencies come to GSA to seek their advice, or shouldn't an agency which is not in the business of construction seek their advice and perhaps ask GSA to, in fact, do the construction or the leasing for them? I don't see the advantage to the government of the SEC saying we're going to build ourselves a building, for example, to name an agency that did that in recent years.
Yes, Ms. Norton, thank you for the question. GSA is happy to partner with our customer agencies and agencies that have their own leasing authority to provide expertise on market rates, to provide expertise on construction build-out and other things. I'm not familiar with the particular project that you're talking about because it is construction, but we are happy and willing to work with any agency out there on expertise. I would suggest that if we are using GSA authority, they must follow GSA regulations. We are the experts in real estate, and that's our core mission. So this is the job of GSA, or one of the jobs of GSA. We are happy to support other real estate programs or other leasing organizations. We're also happy to work.
Well, suppose, let me ask
Yes,
you this,
ma'am.
Commissioner Wiseman. Suppose an agency does have the authority. You know who they are. Is there guidance from GSA available to agencies who have their own leasing authority? Surely they could do with some advice, even if they don't ask for it.
There is not guidance to use GSA. However, there are leasing desk
No, I don't mean
guides.
you use GSA. I'm talking about agencies, none of whom are in the business of leasing or construction, who might not even think of GSA. All they think about is they have the authority, so let me go willy-nilly at it. If they had a piece of paper that said, well, let me see, let's see what the expert agency says is the way to approach this, wouldn't that be useful to agencies?
Yes, ma'am.
Who have such authority?
Available to the public and available online are all of
Say
our...
that again?
Available to the public and available online are all of our leasing desk guides and our pricing policy guidance. Yes, ma'am.
All right, I just want to say that is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about leasing authority, the kinds of issues to look for, the issues that, for example, Mr. Wise said that some apparently found on their own and got comparable or rates that were even better. One more question, if I might. I had a roundtable last year because I have been concerned over a number of years with holdover and short-term leases, and there was if anything, a backlog of such leases. Actually, the GSA did a report. I thought it was an excellent report. It showed very substantial progress being made in the elimination of holdover leases, and a commitment to finding long-term solutions for all of the outstanding leases in this region, which is perhaps the most heavily leased region in the country, to find solutions to those, long-term solutions to those by September 30th, 2017. So, Assistant Commissioner Wisner, I'd like to ask you, are you on track to find long-term solutions? That means no short-term or holdover leases by September 30th of 2017, and what strategy are you using to avoid holdover or short-term leases in the future?
Thank you, Ms. Norton. So I'll address the facts to start off with. We have reduced the number of holdovers by at least 50% in our portfolio. We're down to around 50 holdovers total. That does vary. It goes up a bit, and every month we watch it diligently.
Is that where you expect it to be by this time, Mr. Wisner?
I expect it to be lower than that. The internal goal for holdovers is 0. So we do have puts and takes in that list. We calculate number of months in holdover, which is extremely critical for us. That being said, a short-term holdover, 1 or 2 months, to get us through a negotiation, as opposed to an 18-month holdover where we are at a standstill. We're focused on the long-term holdovers, the critical issues around that. So we are focused on that as a metric across our entire portfolio. As far as extensions, we have reduced the number of extensions that we have in place currently, and led by our commissioner. Every action that we have as far as an expiring lease will have a plan 3 years prior to expiration, and we'll be reaching out to the customer agencies to put a replacement competitive action in place for each of those projects that we are currently consider. We have increased the number of long-term solutions. I believe we are up to about 83% of all of our portfolio has long-term solutions in place or have long-term planning in place.
What does it mean, a long-term solution?
Long-term solutions means that we will have a competitive action that takes us to a new procurement that leads us to a longer-term solution in the market. So it may be a 5-year solution in some cases where we only want to occupy the space for 5 years. It may be a 10-year firm solution, or it may be even longer, up to the level of our scoring requirements, but not to exceed. So we have a very good plan in place, a very robust plan in place, and I'm happy to share the documents with you.
Does the new footprint, the reduced footprint, help or hurt your timetable to get rid of short-term leasing?
No, ma'am. I think it actually helps us. We work with customer agencies, which can often be a protracted period of time to work on reducing the square footage, but overall we are reducing the amount of leases that we have in our portfolio. It has gone down. We've reduced the amount of square footage that we have in our portfolio. Now, that is reducing the stay-in-place option with customers. We must run a procurement. We must run a competitive procurement, and that oftentimes, with the new square footage reduction, drives us to new facilities or drives existing lessors to reduce the amount of square footage that they are offering to us. So it's not precluding staying in place, but there is a competitive action that drives down the square footage and potentially can drive down cost or at least control cost.
Thank you very much for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. If there are no further questions, I'd like to thank you for your testimony. Your comments have been helpful to today's discussion. I would ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing, and unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection so ordered, I'd like to thank our witnesses again for their testimony today. If no other members have anything to add, this subcommittee stands adjourned.